Greetings and welcome. We are in Junior English, and we now return to our conversation of the Transcendentalists, and more particularly the great founder of Transcendentalism, Ralph Waldo Emerson. I just want to make a point for you as you're looking at page 365 out of your hymnal. I just want to make a point about the American Transcendentalists, and now you want to underline the word American Transcendentalists, because there are people as well in other places than America who are playing the same game philosophically about transcendentalism. Okay, there are, for example, British writers, but we don't call them transcendentalists, we call them romantics. Okay, the British romantics. So, for example, Wordsworth and Coleridge and Byron, Shelley, Keats, and all those cats. Those guys are all British writers who are playing a very similar game at exactly the same time. Now, again, you can write down your date here, 1800. It's an easy working date, 1800. The moment in American political thought, philosophic thought, that we call transcendentalism. Now, before we turn to Emerson's first classic essay on transcendental thought, he called it Nature, I just want to make sure to review with us what it is we covered in the last session. We asked, what is transcendentalism? And we went back to a great Greek philosopher named Socrates and Plato's theory of the forms, it's often referred to, where we put two boxes up on a board, you'll remember, right? And in the first box, above the first box, we wrote the word images or physical, right? Or, you know, the what we can see, taste, touch, that kind of thing, related to the five senses. And then in the second box, above that box, we put ideas or concepts. So, for example, we can talk about the symbol, number 2, or we can talk about the actual number 2. The actual number 2 will sit in that second box. You can't really touch that, right? We can talk about a beautiful body, and we're going to put that in the first box, but you can't really touch beauty. Beauty is something that we would call an idea or a concept, yes? Which is why often these transcendentalists didn't like the term transcendentalism. They like the term idealism, as in idea, right? Concepts, ideas, all right? So, again, to be a transcendentalist means not that you disavow the first box, not that you don't believe it exists, right? So you believe Ruthie's tree sits outside that window right there. Not that, but that Ruthie's tree is important to help you understand the second box. If you can transcend the first box, go from the physical to the, what did we use the term yesterday? Do you remember it? And I would write it down now in this in your notes now. From the physical to the metaphysical, beyond the physical, right? The metaphysical. That metaphysical view is for the transcendentalists crucial, okay? Now, Emerson is going to present his classic ideas first in an essay that he called Nature. So let's go ahead now and turn to that text. I'm with you on page 367. Let's go ahead and look at the background information real quickly at the top of that page. During the 1830s and 40s, you might want to write that date down. Emerson and a small group of like-minded friends gathered regularly in his study to discuss philosophy, religion, literature, different kinds of people. The protege of Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, as well as, of course, Bronson Alcott, the feminist writer Margaret Fuller, ex-clergyman and author George Ripley. These are all an intimate group of friends who got together, and they became known as the Transcendentalist Club. Developed a philosophic system that stressed intuition. That means you try and figure stuff out not only by thinking it through, but by your heart, right? In other words, not just the head, but also the heart, right? Okay, intuition. Individuality. Now, that's an interesting term. You may want to write that term down as well. What does that term mean? To be an individual means you don't just go with the group, that you make up your own mind about stuff, right? That you don't just follow. You'll remember Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. Individuality means you examine what you do. You examine your life. Look at the next one. Individuality, self-reliance. Now that's a term we're going to see here in a bit that's important for us. To believe in yourself, to trust in yourself, right? To not always feel about yourself like you're a loser, okay? That's what we mean by self-reliance. In 1836, and that's a crucial date, so you want to write that down. 1836. So while we work with 1800 as an easy working date for American transcendentalism, 1836 is a key date for us because that's the year that Emerson actually publishes an essay called Nature, okay, from which we will read only a few lines. By the way, this is a very long essay. You can go online, Google it, and you can find the entire essay, and it will take you several hours to read the entire essay. I mean, it's several pages long, okay? It's probably close to 50 pages long essay, all right? So you're only reading a very small part of this essay, but it was majorly influential when he published it, okay? Notice here, Emerson published Nature, the lengthy essay excerpt here that became the Transcendental Club's unofficial statement of belief. In other words, if you wanted to know what Emerson and the Transcendentalists believed, you picked up this essay, Nature. Okay? So now we're going to turn to this essay, Nature, and we're going to look at it for a moment. We're going to listen to it, we're going to read it, and then we're going to exegete. Now, that's an important term for us, exegete. That is to say, annotate. It's just another word. In other words, we're going to read, we're going to take a few notes. At level 1, we're going to ask, what does this text say? At level 2, we're going to ask, what does this text mean? At level 3, we're going to ask, how does this text relate? Right? Now, it will help us that we had our word picture from yesterday. What's interesting about my whiteboard is that it's empty today. But I could ask you really quickly in your mind's eye to put those two boxes up in your mind's eye again, and you can immediately remember, oh yeah, and then there were those arrows that went from one box to the other box. That is the transcendental word picture that we'll draw from. So as we listen to this little bit of reading and we read along, we'll be asking, what does any of this have to do with that word picture we put up on that whiteboard yesterday? Does it help us to understand that information a little bit easier? So here we go. We're going to now turn to a reading of this text. I recommend you practice your reading speed. Have your pen in hand. Follow along. Don't write in your book, but follow along, word to word. Can you stay up with our reader? Or do you find that our reader is reading faster than you can follow? If that's the case, then we want to help you in terms of reading speed. As we get ready then to try to improve our comprehension of texts, and this will not be an easy reading for you, I will tell you that in advance. Emerson and the Transcendentalists are sometimes difficult at first to really understand, which is why I spent my time yesterday giving you a schemata, a word picture on the whiteboard that'll give you some sense of what this cat's talking about. Of course, if he's talking about nature, you can already jot down at level 1, you can guess what he'll be talking about. He'll be talking about what? Ruthie's tree, right? He'll be talking about the stuff of nature, the stuff like Ruthie's tree. What is he going to say about the stuff like Ruthie's tree? Well, that's an interesting question. Let's follow along. Here we go. We're now ready for Emerson's Nature.
Nature by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Nature is a setting that fits equally well a comic or a mourning piece. In good health, the air is a cordial of incredible virtue. Crossing a bare common in snow puddles at twilight under a clouded sky, without having in my thoughts any occurrence of special good fortune, I have enjoyed a perfect exhilaration. I am glad to the brink of fear. In the woods, too, a man casts off his years as the snake his slough, and at what period soever of life is always a child. In the woods is perpetual youth. Within these plantations of God, a decorum and sanctity reign. A perennial festival is dressed, and the guest sees not how he should tire of them in 1,000 years. In the woods, we return to reason and faith. There I feel that nothing can befall me in life, no disgrace, no calamity, leaving me my eyes, which nature cannot repair. Standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air and uplifted into infinite space, all mean egotism vanishes. I become a transparent eyeball. I am nothing, I see all. The currents of the universal being circulate through me. I am part or parcel of God. The name of the nearest friend sounds then foreign and accidental. To be brothers, to be acquaintances, master or servant, is then a trifle and a disturbance. I am the lover of uncontained and immortal beauty. the wilderness, I find something more dear and connate than in the streets or villages. In the tranquil landscape, and especially in the distant line of the horizon, man beholds somewhat as beautiful as his own nature. The greatest delight which the fields and woods minister is the suggestion of an occult relation between man and the vegetable. I am not alone and unacknowledged. They nod to me, and I to them. The waving of the boughs in the storm is new to me and old. It takes me by surprise, and yet is not unknown. Its effect is like that of a higher thought or a better emotion coming over me when I deemed I was thinking justly or doing right. Yet it is certain that the power to produce this delight does not reside in nature, but in man, or in a harmony of both. It is necessary to use these pleasures with great temperance. For nature is not always tricked in holiday attire, but the same scene which yesterday breathed perfume and glittered as for the frolic of the nymphs is overspread with melancholy today. Nature always wears the colors of the spirit. To a man laboring under calamity, the heat of his own fire hath sadness in it. Then there is a kind of contempt of the landscape felt by him who has just lost by death a dear friend. The sky is less grand as it shuts down over less worth in the population.
All right, so let's go to it now. This is a very brief cutting from a very long essay. And it's always hard to know how to cut out from such a long essay the key passage. One of the reasons why often this passage is anthologized, that is to say, put in an anthology like this, to represent Emerson's essay nature, is because of the reference to the transparent eyeball, okay? And maybe we'll talk a little about that. But I want to start with something very simple at level 1. Jot down, if you had to, what is this passage even about? Could you reduce it to a single line so that later in the day somebody asks you to do what you do? You know, why we read this thing called, essay called Nature, from the essay called Nature. What was it about? Can you reduce it to a single line? But make it simple. Make it simple enough that you could tell a 6th grader about it. Don't be so complex. I mean, you would agree with me. Some of the information that we put on a whiteboard in regards to those 2 boxes, that's probably a little bit more difficult to explain to a 6th grader. But can you explain out of this, what does he say about walking in the woods? Maybe that's an easy place to start. Write it in your notes. What does he say about walking in the woods? Interesting, notice his very first line. Walking in the woods, that is to say nature, is a setting that fits equally well a comic, happy or sad? Happy. Or a morning piece. Now we don't mean good morning here. Did you see the spelling? What does this morning mean? Happy or sad? Sad. So in other words, nature accommodates to both sides. Now, I of course enjoy living and teaching in a place where lots and lots of my students know what this means to go for a walk in the woods. Sometimes they're holding a firearm, sometimes they're just walking to enjoy being out in the woods. Either way, you know what I'm saying when I talk about what it's like to be in the woods in October, where you can have both positive feelings and also sometimes negative feelings when you're out in the woods. The nature of the trees and the sky. Notice what he says about all of this. He says, when I am there in a good mood, I am glad to the brink of fear. Now that's an interesting line. In other words, he says, I get so excited when I'm out in the nature, in the woods, that sometimes it even makes me kind of afraid. Can you jot down why you think maybe he says that it can make him almost afraid? And some of us have had this experience. Maybe walking in the woods, loving it, and then all of a sudden, if we're alone, for a split second going, oh, how do I get back to my truck or my car? For a split moment, all of a sudden it can hit you. Dude, there's like for hundreds of miles in every direction, nothing. No other people. Oh, I could like die out here. Nobody would ever even find me. See how that works? In other words, you can almost feel at times very insignificant, small, right? When you are alone in nature. Now, why is that important? Because humans have a tendency to start to think that we are so much more important than nature, so much bigger than nature, right? Ruthie's tree is dumb. It just stands there and can't move or go to lunch here in a little bit. I'm clearly superior to Ruthie's tree, all right? When you're in the woods, of course, and you're standing with 10 million trees around you, it's almost like the trees say back to you, seriously? You really think you're that much greater? See how that works? In other words, walking in the woods reminds us of our place in nature. Now, of course, he says that when we're in nature, we return to reason and faith. Let's write that term down. We return to reason and faith. Now, what does that even mean? Well, reason of or related to our thinking mind. What is faith? Well, this is a different kind of understanding, isn't it? Faith of or related to what we believe, what we hope, the emotions, right? In other words, he makes an interesting argument. When you're out in the woods, walking around, you have the ability to both think, but also to feel stuff, right? Notice he says also, egotism vanishes. Well, what does that term even mean? You may want to write that word down. Egotism. Egotism vanishes. Well, here we're talking, of course, about the idea of I am more important than everyone else, right? I am more important than everyone else. Egotism. He says, it's interesting, when you're all alone in the woods, you have a tendency to kind of stop thinking about just yourself. And you have a tendency to start thinking about other people and other things among the woods. In the end, he says that he is, of course, as well, conscious of being an eyeball. Now, this is a very famous idea of Emerson, and it runs something like this. The eyeball can't see itself. Like if I were to tell you right now, look at your eyes. Go ahead, do it. You would say what? Dude, you have to have an eyeball to see an eyeball. Oh, okay, use your eyes to see your eyeball. Yeah, dude, you can't do that. Well, you don't have any eyes. No, I have eyes. Well, then look at them. No. See how that works? You have to have the eyes to see the eyes, but the eyeball can't see itself. See how that works, right? He says, when I'm in nature, I have this realization, notice, that I am nothing. I see all. In other words, he says, I have this ability to move from the first box to the second box, right? I go from looking at beautiful stuff to trying to see beauty itself. Because it's a fair question to ask. What's the difference between you and the dog walking in the woods with you? Well, that's an interesting question. What is the difference between you and the dog walking in the woods with you? Well, think about it this way. Both you and the dog can look at the sunset, but only one of the two of you can appreciate the sunset. Now, that is an interesting observation Emerson will make. Both you and the dog can look at the sunset, but only one of the two of you can go, oh, look, that is so pretty. That's so beautiful. Only one of the two of you can do that. Your dog can't do that. Why can't your dog do that? See how that works? Because the human mind has the capacity to begin to kind of approach those things in the second box, like beauty. Of course, if we were to ask you, what's beautiful about a sunset? That's an interesting question. Dude, it's just a bunch of clouds, or it's just a blue sky, or it's just a bunch of colors. Well, yeah, but it's beautiful. What do you mean beautiful? Like, why? Dude, it's just nothing more than... See how that works? Right? And of course, we all have this debate in different ways. So, for example, your pal comes up and says, oh, you got to hear this music, it's amazing. And you listen to it and you go, it sucks. What do you mean it sucks? I love that music. How does that work? We all have different ways to appreciate. Have you ever had somebody tell you a movie would be great, you go to the movie, you're like, yeah, no, not for me. Or somebody says, I hate that movie, and you're like, I love that movie. See, we have different capacities of appreciation, right? When we are in nature, Emerson says, we have this sense that we are approaching beauty. Look on page 368. He says, I am the lover of uncontained and immortal beauty. Whoa, what does immortal mean? Immortal. Mortal means you die. What is immortal? It doesn't die. See, we can look back at our two boxes from earlier conversation and say it this way. Everything in the first box dies. I said yesterday, what? Sags and bags. Everything dies. But in the second box, how are you going to kill beauty? How are you going to kill truth? How are you going to kill love? Right? Take out a knife and stab value and kill it. It doesn't work, right? See, it doesn't work. You can't kill beauty. It is immortal. Now, Ruthie's tree, of course you can kill. That's easy to do. But can you kill the energy of Ruthie's tree? That is an interesting question. And, of course, our scientists will tell us, yeah, no, you can't destroy energy. Well, that's interesting. You can kill the tree, but you can't kill the energy that is the tree. You can kill the stuff in the first box. You can't kill the stuff in the second box. Which leads to a very interesting question when you're walking in the woods. Who are you? And what are you? Whoa, now that's an interesting question. Who are you and what are you? Well, in the first box, I'm this thing called a body, and you can put a bullet right through my head and that body's going to go away. But in the same way that you can kill a tree, but you can't kill its energy, you can kill me with a 12 gauge, but you can't kill my what? My energy. Oh. Well, that's interesting. Well, then how come we're so scared to die then? Emerson says, because we don't walk enough in the woods. If we spend more time walking in the woods, we wouldn't be as scared to die. Because there is no death in the second box. It does not exist. His word is, what's his word again? Immortal. Interesting. Let's keep going before we finish. Notice he says that its effect is like that of a higher thought. Do you see that in the second paragraph on 368? A higher thought or a better emotion. Now, some of us know this without language like this. So, for example, if I'm feeling really crummy, I jump in my car, I go out into the Badlands, and I just sit for a few hours or a few minutes, and all of a sudden I kind of start to feel a little bit better. I have a better emotional state. Or, for example, I'm ready to rip the ever-living snot out of somebody's head, and instead of actually doing it, I go for a drive, and I go out and I walk, and by the time I'm done, I kind of feel better. He says, right, that's because our emotions are tied to a lot of the stuff in the first box. We start to think that it really matters. We start to feel like all of that matters. And the moment that we think all that stuff is so important and serious, then we can get really freaked out. And then all of a sudden we can start to get really upset. And then we'll say things and do things that we probably shouldn't say or do. You know what I'm saying? If you'll think back, the last time you did something that you really thought after the fact was a dumb thing to do and you regretted it, if you ask the question why you did it, a lot of times it'll be because my head wasn't right, my heart wasn't right, my emotions weren't right. I was either upset, or I was angry, or I was afraid. I wasn't feeling quite right. And looking at it after the fact, I often will say to myself, if I had been like in a better place mentally or emotionally, I probably wouldn't have done it. It wasn't that I didn't know it was the wrong thing to do. It was that I didn't have a really good reason not to do it at the time. Notice he finishes here with this idea in the last paragraph of our cutting. He says, yet it is certain that the power to produce this delight does not reside in nature, but in man, or in a harmony of both. And that's the word you want to write down. Harmony. Go ahead and write that word down and look at that word. What does it mean if somebody picks up a guitar and starts strumming it and you go, whoa, 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 it's way out of tune? What does that mean? It doesn't sound quite right. What does the word harmony mean? Well, we like, of course, today we like the word what? Balance or equilibrium, right? For example, if things are working right. I saw just recently, some guy must have jacked the back right corner of his truck bad. I don't know if he was four-wheeling and he just took it, he hit a rock or something. But he was driving down the highway and we were behind him and that back right tire was just doing one of these numbers. And I was asking, man, I wonder what it's like to be sitting in the cab of that truck because you know what it feels like in a cab of that truck. If that back tire's doing one of these, what's it feel like, right? Everybody's doing one of these numbers. In other words, just a little bit off kilter. There's something that's not quite right. Do you know what I'm saying? And Emerson says, when you wake up in the morning and you're just not quite right, it's funny how the rest of your day goes just not quite right. Have you noticed this? Right? Things just don't seem to work out quite right. But if you wake up and you have a sense of harmony, a sense of balance, well, that's one step away from another word that we didn't put up on that whiteboard in the second box, but it's a funny word. It's the word peace. I don't mean a piece of pie. I mean peace, right? Do you know what I mean by peace? That is to say, harmony. That is to say, it's all fine. It's all good. We're totally chill. Everything is fine. Where does that come from? That ability. Do you know some people have that ability? It's like no matter what happens, they're all just like, it's cool, it's no worries. And then other people, they just get ratcheted up. Right? Why is it that's the case? Emerson says, because they have harmony. It's a little more chill. And he says, that's the case. But notice how he finishes. It's not always the case that nature wears the colors of the spirit. In other words, sometimes the woods can be a really frightening place. Yes, not always a great place. Those of us who like to snow machine in the mountains, for example, know one wrong turn and things can go sideways quick. And then all of a sudden a beautiful day can turn into a rotten day. Or those of us who like the four-wheel out in the Badlands, right? One wrong jack and everything can go sideways. See how that works? In other words, things can always go from good to bad. Agreed? Right? And so he says nature reminds us of the power of that. All right, there's an introduction. Let's go to 2a really quickly. Can you jot down at least one message from this reading? And I'm going to help you out now. What is the one message in relationship to our document, our schemata on the board yesterday? What is the main message of this passage? What does he say about the value of the woods? Can you write it down in your own words? Don't put it in his words. Put it in your own words. Okay. And I want to make a really interesting observation from 364 as we move now to 2b. Watch this. This is kind of cool. At 2b, do you see there that it says metaphor? Right? Do you see that on 364? Do you see it says metaphor? Now, what is a metaphor? Let's write that down at 2b. What is a metaphor? A metaphor is when we are going to compare two things to each other. Right? We're going to compare two things to each other. Now, this is kind of interesting, and we'll look at this opening line here, and we'll see what he has to say. He has said, look on page 367. In the woods, 2, are you reading with me? I'm roughly 4 or 5 lines down on 367 in the first graph. In the woods, 2, a man casts off his years as the snake his sloth. What does that even mean? And at what period soever of life is always a child. Now, this is an interesting, actually it's a simile more than it is a metaphor, but it's a comparison that's quite fascinating. He says, how do snakes do it? Well, they kind of rejuvenate themselves by crawling out of their old skin with new skin. Have you ever seen this? You're walking along in the woods and all of a sudden you see snake skin. You're like, where's the rest of the snake? No, the snake's not dead. He just crawled out of his skin, right? Same gig here. He says, when I go for a walk in the woods, it's like I come out of my skin, and all of a sudden I become a child all over again. Now that's an interesting idea, to become a kid, to become a child all over again. In another lifetime, I was a coach, and we were a good club that year. We were a very good club. And we went to a tournament where there was all kinds of stuff happening as we got off the bus. I demanded that my players were very disciplined. And as they got off the bus, they were expected to go and begin the warm-up process. And by the time I stepped off the bus, all my players are standing in a group looking out onto a soccer field. And I was upset about this. And I come walking up, and I'm ready to tear into them. What are you guys doing? We got to get ready. Go, go, go. You know, that kind of thing. And all of a sudden I looked, and I saw what they were looking at. And what they were looking at was off to the side on one of the side fields was a group of little 6-year-old boys playing soccer. They're all about this tall. You know what I'm talking about? Their shin guards are taller than they are, you know. And if you've ever seen this kind of thing, it's just a huge herd of humanity running after the ball. You never can even see the ball, right? Everybody's just wailing on each other, you know. They're giggling, they're laughing, they're falling down. And all of a sudden it hit me. I'm standing here, I'm watching a bunch of 6-year-olds, but I'm also looking at these boys who are now 17 and 18-year-old men that I coached, all of them when they were 6. Many years before, right? And I'm looking, and they're like these big men looking out at these little boys. And one of my players said to me under his breath, "I remember when it used to be fun." Whoa. I remember when it used to be fun. We played a top team. We destroyed the team. Afterwards, the coach, who knew me well, came up and he said, "I've seen your clubs play hard, but I've never seen them play that hard. What did you say to them before the game? I'm just interested." And I told him the story of what we had seen. And I said, all I said before the game was, let's just go have fun for once. Let's remember what it was like to be a kid and just play for fun. And what you got at the end of the game at 6. What did you get? You got a fruit roll up and you got a juice box. And that was enough. It didn't matter. As long as you got that, everything else was great in your life. Funny how that worked. All I said was that. Let's go have fun. And those kids went out and they played like children. They didn't play like men. They played like kids. And they had fun. F-U-N. Why is fun so missing from the life of a high school student? Why is that? And it doesn't matter what you want to talk about. Whether it's school, whether it's sports, whether it's work. Even sometimes when it's hanging out with our friends. It's not fun anymore. The innocence is somehow gone, taken out of it. Do you know what we're saying? It's not as much fun anymore. And you look kind of at 40-year-olds. Do you know these 40-year-olds? They get up every morning. Gotta go to another day of work. Right? And you ask yourself, you do realize you're halfway to 40. You're halfway to 40, or soon will be. At 20, you're halfway to 40. What will you be like at 40? What will 18-year-olds think of you when you're 40? Will they look at you and say, "Oh, geez, I hope I don't end up like that person when I'm 40"? Or will they look at you and say, "Yeah, that's what I hope I'm like when I'm 40. Somebody that has that level of energy, that much fun still in life." Why is life so little fun? Emerson says, because we don't spend enough time walking in the woods. What? See, it's kind of counterintuitive almost, huh? Let's go to 3A real quickly. What's your favorite movie about learning to have fun and be a kid? What's your favorite book about understanding the power of nature, both good and bad? What's your favorite scene out of a film where nature shows how scary it can be, how frightening it can be, how powerful it can be? And then finally, at 3B, what is your favorite place in nature? If right now you could shut your eyes and go to one place that isn't inside of a building, where would that be? Write it down really quickly. And for those of you that go, "Gee, I don't know, I have a place like that," Emerson says, "Oh, that's sad. You got to spend more time outside. Out. Find a spot where you can go back to it." Of course, the spot that you're writing down, it's kind of sad to sometimes ask, when was the last time you were there? I had a senior once who wrote down the spot and then had to admit, "I wasn't there since I was in middle school." That's S-A-D, isn't it? Right? Of course, the beautiful thing is, you still have another day. So maybe you can go back to visit. Or, just as simple as during lunch, take a walk to the park, where you can just sit and look at a tree, or look at the sky, or look at the clouds. Somebody driving by might say, "Stupid kids today, all they do is lounge around and waste their time." But you might say, no, it's all about harmony. I'm trying to get a little bit better balance to it all. Do you know what I'm saying? This is what Emerson is saying in his classic essay, Nature. So, welcome to Transcendentalism and Ralph Waldo Emerson's Nature.